All right, Peter Thompson is next up, and Matthew gave him a great segue talking about Thoreau, and we're gonna ease right in.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Matt, for filling in all the spaces that I would have left out, or how can I say this? Providing some good background for what I'm going to be sharing with you. This talk I prepared originally in 2005 for a Geological Society of America meeting. And at that meeting, there was a session on the contributions that Henry David Thoreau made to the understanding of New England geology, all the way from Maine to Cape Cod and here. And I thought, well, maybe this would be appropriate to share with you folks. I was mapping the bedrock of the Monadnock area back in the 1980s. And I really fell in love with not just the mountain, but the whole region. And I think the same sort of thing happened to Henry David Thoreau. He visited Monadnock on 4 occasions, a solo overnight on the summit in 1844, a one-day jaunt in 1852, and more extended stays in 1858 and 1860. He recounts in his journal how he heard from a Peterborough man about the great fires that destroyed the forest and soil. According to his journal, this apparently happened in around 1800. And as Matt recounted for us, the settlers had set fire to brush piles around the foot of the mountain to drive out wolves. And when the fire got away from them, the whole summit went up in flames. Well, there certainly was some kind of huge conflagration at about that time, because there are other accounts of this. It was visible apparently from as far away as Mount Wachusett. It was a huge fire. And I think that the soil, the forests and soil were greatly disturbed at that time. Regardless of how the tree line was lowered, Monadnock presents one of the largest exposures of continuous bedrock anywhere in New England. Thoreau wrote, "But what a study for rocks does this mountaintop afford." He observed that the plants on the summit are suited to Arctic conditions, quote, "conditions as in the north of Maine and in the fur countries," fur spelled F-U-R. He wrote that the juncos nesting on Monadnock had discerned Arctic isles sprinkled in our southern skies. Thoreau made copious notes on the trees and plant communities of Monadnock. His interest and training in botany clearly outshone his geological background. He noted sheep laurel, for example, mountain cranberries, and of course, blueberries, which still provide a welcome distraction to the scientists, any scientist who's trying to do work there today. Monadnock was already at his time a beacon to human visitors. And although Thoreau lamented the, quote, newspaper and eggshell left behind, he took the long view and predicted that names chiseled into the rock would soon be reclaimed by, quote, bog and lichen. Today, the summit is purported to be among the most climbed in the world. Thoreau wrote, "It is remarkable what haste these visitors make to get to the top of the mountain and then look away from it. The great charm is not to look off from a height, but to walk over this novel and wonderful rocky surface." He explored the whole mountaintop and made a passable map using a compass and estimating distances, quote, "very rudely by casting a stone before me." He explored, here we see a modern air photo alongside Thoreau's map. And you can see that it's really a very good map. it shows the open bedrock areas and the spurs that he mentioned. After descending in 1852, he wrote, "We could see that the mountain had spurs or buttresses on every side. An interesting feature in a mountain. I have noticed that they will send out these buttresses every way from their center." In this passage, the mountain almost seems to will its own shape. During his longest stay, Thoreau built a rough shelter here on the plateau southeast of the summit. Here's how it looked around 1900, and today, well, 25 years ago, growing back to spruce forest. Thoreau described how the rock layers near the campsite tilt toward the summit. And he sketched a cross-section view. He noted how the layers on the west side run north-south and dip to the east about 45 degrees. But somehow he missed the huge isoclinal fold just west of the summit that Matt mentioned. This was pictured as the frontispiece in Marlin Billings' 1945 structural geology textbook, which was used throughout not just New England, but all of North America. It was the major structural geology book. Or perhaps Thoreau saw the fold and found in it, quote, "strains from the music of chaos, such as were heard when the earth was rent and these rocks heaved up," or down, as the case may be, down below mountains, which were much, much higher. He was inspired by the sound of nighthawks swooping in the dark over the mountain to write, "I could imagine their dainty limping flight circling over the kindred rock with a spot of white quartz in their wings." Thoreau noted quartz veins, but not the tarry-looking tourmaline veins that are also common on Monadnock. He refers to bright purple or wine-colored garnets, which he'd read about in C.T. Jackson's description of Monadnock geology as mica schist and garnet-bearing gneiss. But notice the tiny size of typical Monadnock garnets. You really have to hunt for them. Curiously, he omits mention of the much more conspicuous Sillomanite crystals, Sillomanite forming after Andalusite, or in the shape of pre-existing Andalusite, which Jackson described as giving the gneiss a porphyritic appearance, and which modern visitors refer to as turkey tracks. You can't go up there without noticing them. Well, geologists have studied minerals like Sillomanite and Andalusite and kyanite in the lab. This is a diagram of the stability of various reactions with pressure increasing upwards here and temperature increasing toward the right. These three aluminum silicate minerals are kyanite, which is the high pressure version, Andalusite, which is the high temperature version, and Sillomanite, both high pressure and high temperature. These experiments that have discovered all of this are done in the lab. But what they tell us is that in order to have Sillomanite in the rocks, you have to have a temperature of at least 550, 600 degrees centigrade. And the pressures have to be, a depth of 40,000 feet. 8 miles. That's a lot of mountain to have eroded since the time the rocks were formed. Of course, it wasn't just a matter of erosion downward, but also as that happened, the crust bounced back upward. So it was a balancing act. So the Sillomanite is really significant. It tells us a lot about the history of the rocks. And this seems to have stopped advancing. Je ne sais pas pourquoi. Page down. Nope. Any suggestions? Yeah. No, I was only using. Well, maybe I did this by mistake. There we go. Misty can, we don't need Misty, I guess. Thanks. Thoreau was fascinated by the arrangement of joints, or the cracks, and the shape of rocks on the mountain. I searched for his hog trough without success, but I found many perfect triangles which held particular fascination for Thoreau. Thoreau struggled to explain what he observed, conjuring up earthquakes and titans. He never mentions glaciers in his journals. Yet he describes again and again features that we would recognize as glacial in origin, such as erratics and striations. He wrote, "The rocks which you walk over are often not only worn smooth and slippery, but grooved out, as if with some huge rounded tool, or they are much oftener convex." Thoreau described how the north slopes are gradual compared to the south side, which is common on mountains throughout New England due to glacial ice that plucked boulders from ledges on the lee side of the mountains. He measured striation directions and recorded them in his journals. And he also described verbally what geologists now call rush moutonnae. And I'm reminded again of Clara's talk on how naming something is maybe not that important as describing what you're seeing. Like the whole mountain, these smaller forms are also due to molding and plucking by ice. Well, why didn't he mention glaciers? In the 1850s, geology was in the midst of a paradigm shift with respect to interpreting glacial drift. The 1855 publication of a book by Elisha Keene, which described the enormous effects of the Greenland continental scale glacier, helped to advance acceptance of the idea of a great North American ice sheet. Some, like Professor Dana at Yale, had embraced the idea, while others, including those who were publishing works on New England geology, preferred a diluvial origin, imagining that rocks and icebergs were dragged across the landscape by the sea at a time of lower sea level, at a time when of higher sea level, excuse me. Well, Thoreau had met the Swiss geologist Louis Agassiz when Agassiz visited New England, and he'd read his ideas on glaciation, but he'd also read C.T. Jackson. And in the Geology of New Hampshire that Jackson wrote, he argued, Agassiz's theory originated among the glaciers of the high Alps, but it is by no means applicable to the widespread drift of New England, meaning the loose material on the surface. Grooves should radiate from mountaintops, not cross them. Clearly on Monadnock, they cross them. The scratches go right across the mountain. But after it wasn't accepted really until after Thoreau had passed away. By 1872, Charles Hitchcock published the Geology, New Hampshire. The diluvial theory had been abandoned in favor of a continental glacier. Ralph Waldo Emerson visited the summit of Monadnock in 1866 and noted, quote, "The uniform presence on the upper surface of the glacial lines or scratches, all in one self-same direction." What did Thoreau think about all this? Well, we don't know. The only hint of Thoreau's attitude toward Agassiz theory, Ice Age theory, and it's only a hint, comes in this amusing passage. Thoreau is speculating on how amphibians came to be on the summit. Agassiz might say they originated on top, because you see, according to Agassiz's idea, there have been several ice ages, and after each one, you had to have a whole succession of creation again to populate the area. Thoreau goes on, perhaps they fell from the clouds in the form of spawn or tadpoles. I think it more likely that they fell down than that they hopped up. I think Thoreau's most original observations have to do with Monadnock's hydrologic cycle. He found it astonishing that pools and bogs lie directly next to, quote, the most barren and driest spots. You step unexpectedly from Arabia Petraea, where the lichens crackle under your feet, into a miniature bog, say Dismal Swamp. He concluded that the small ponds around the summit are not spring-fed, but rather more like rainwater cisterns. We've certainly seen that in these droughts we've had recently. They have been completely drying up, which was certainly not the case in the 1980s. He speculated on the balance between rainfall, fog, and evaporation, and correctly concluded that the coolness on mountains lowers the evaporation rate compared to that at lower elevations. And although Thoreau never visited Monadnock in winter, he describes how the spruces spread out their branches close to the rock in response to the harsh winter winds. Out on the northeast spur, which we see here, are two larger bogs that have been named after Thoreau. Some of you may have visited them. He spent many hours exploring these bogs, especially on his 1860 trip. On the left here, we see the larger lower bog, which is separated from a higher, more elongated bog to the south. He lists in the journal the grasses, sedges, mosses, and shrubs growing in the bogs. The bogs lie in the hinge region of a late open fold. This is a later fold from the one that you see on the side of the mountain. And he observed how each bog drains away from the divide between them, one toward the Ashwaylet and Connecticut rivers, the other south to feed the headwaters of the Contoocook and Merrimack. This is we'll skip that, and we'll skip that. This is a view from a place called Thoreau's Seat, though it's unlikely he ever sat here. His trips to Monadnock were an escape from the work and worries of the family's graphite pencil industry. By 1860, his father was not well, and Henry bore most of the burden. The Thoreau family business shifted from making pencils, for which Henry had introduced many innovations, including a hardness scale, to providing ground graphite for the Smith and McDougall Electrotype Company of Boston. Visitors to the Thoreau household noted that everything was coated by black dust. Inhaling those particulates may well have contributed to his chronic bronchitis and death at age 44. He makes no mention of the small graphite mine on the ridge south of the summit, which was worked from 1847 to 1850. I can't help but speculate that he knew of this activity and may even have negotiated to purchase the graphite. One last thought here from Thoreau. He wrote, "The Monadnock area is literally a chaos, an example of what the earth was before it was finished." The language in his journal often leaps back and forth from detailed descriptions and lofty, even fanciful images. It reflects the transcendentalist tendency to trust intuition as well as rational thought. As for the somewhat shallow treatment of geological features, perhaps with 17th century scientist Steno, he would say, "Most beautiful is that which we do not comprehend." Thank you.